Once they were a mighty herd, perhaps 200 strong, pinto, bay, black, and roan horses, rippling through thousands of acres of pine forest. They were as free as the sea winds that blew across the island they had conquered. Many people alive in the year 2000 remember seeing them flashing through the forests, running down the beaches of Treasure Cay. Great Abaco is one of the northernmost of the Bahama Islands. Its origins remained unclear until 1999, when initial DNA tests were carried out. The first 3 tests showed that the horses most closely resembled Paso Fino. They could have been survivors of a Spanish wreck. There are a number of Spanish wrecks in the area. Few horse-wise people would have expected any domestic horse to survive here after years of human care. No matter how they arrived, after years of being fed, groomed, and cared for, suddenly there were no restraints. Halters were gone. Perhaps they stood for a while, blinking in the sun. Eventually, they would move off, seeking shelter, food, and in the manner of horses, companionship. In the 1960s, disaster struck. No impossible fire, flood, or disease. A simple road was carved out of the chalky limestone surface of Great Abaco. A road running from one end of Great Abaco to the other, so that Owens, Illinois could harvest the remaining forests for pulpwood. The shelter of the pines was shattered. Suddenly, humans had access to miles and miles of long abandoned but still passable logging roads from earlier operations. Boar hunters, who once had to walk in after their wary and elusive prey, now could drive pickup trucks full of dogs, men, and guns right into new territory. Where once they had to carry out on their shoulders one heavy animal, they now could slaughter and carry 6 or 7. They could run the horses down the roads until they were close enough to be roped out of the windows, or until they dropped from exhaustion. Many of these animals became legends for their anecdotal lives, the vicious cruelty visited on them, and their tragic ends. Often, the hunters' dogs would chase the horses instead of the boars, and just as often, the horses would trample the dogs in self-defense. The hunters shot the horses. Some were butchered and eaten. Most were left to rot. A dreadful accident in which a young child died who tried to ride a wild horse led to further killings. My quest began with a few short sentences buried on page 235 of the 1992 Yachtsman's Guide to the Bahamas. Quote, "The old settlements of Norman Castle, in days gone by, was a busy logging camp, but it was abandoned in 1929. Today, few traces of the settlement or the industry remain, and the only inhabitants are herds of wild horses." As a horse-crazy child, I read every romantic horse novel ever printed, and most of them contained that mystical, irresistible combination of plucky youngsters, mysterious islands, vile villains, and wild horses in need of rescue. When I later transferred that passion for equines into one for old wooden sailboats, I still had horses galloping around in my heart. And my heart nearly stopped when, while planning the sailing trip to Abaco, I read those 2 short sentences. The only positive information I got was from the Bahamas National Trust, whose president told me via telephone, yes, they are there. When I arrived at Green Turtle Cay, all I heard was that the horses were all dead. They had died of poisoning. They had all been shot. None were left. But about 8 days after I had arrived, I heard that a young girl whose parents owned a business on Green Turtle Cay had not only seen the horses, but had photographed them during a trip to Great Abaco the year before. They were on a citrus farm in the Norman Castle area. I was kindly invited for a visit, and a few days later we set out, and I rode in the back of a pickup truck hanging onto a camera heavy with a borrowed telephoto lens. With my free hand, I clung to the truck cab as we bounced over miles of packed dirt farm roads. When I saw the first band, I had to fight back tears as I fussed with the manual focus on the camera. The horses were real. After months of preparation, weeks of travel, and days of negative response, there they were. Not ponies, not scruffy, shaggy little drudges, but big, healthy, shiny-coated horses. One of the bands had a special treat, a yearling pinto colt, who was the image of one of the foals photographed the year before. Here he was, growing well and just full of sass and spirit. By my next trip in 1994, both he and his mother had disappeared, along with several other horses I identified from the photos I took in 1992. There were no black horses seen before the slaughter by reliable eyewitnesses. But at the time, I was optimistic, even euphoric, and I continued digging into their origins. How had the horses, slaughtered to the point of extinction in the 60s, come to be alive at all in the healthy, energetic herd of about 35 animals which roamed the farm and nearby regenerating forests? Former Senator Edison Key gave his version. Clearing the land for the farm project in the early 70s, we found carcasses and bones all over. 3 horses were brought up from Marsh Harbor, and when they had gotten up to about 10 to 12 head, we turned them loose. Dogs have gotten a few foals over the years, but the adults learned to defend themselves. No one is quite sure exactly how the decision was made to bring the wild horses back. Certainly, Edison Key, Floyd Sawyer, Gail Cotman, and Steve Albury all had a part in the seemingly casual events that saved the wild horses of Abaco from extinction. In 1992, the future seemed rosy, but as I returned almost year after year, I realized that many horses I hadn't fully identified but which were familiar were disappearing. In 1997, I spent 3 intense weeks with a leaky camera and a mountain bicycle and established the first complete identification of each remaining horse. And today, the horses are once again in need of rescue. As I began to collect skulls, it became clear that many of the horses were not even 6 years old, and not all the deaths were natural. One big stallion was found dead in a pig trap. I found the bones over the noosed polypropylene rope. Kochab was the only stallion whose bones could have been that big. Stallions will fight. They do not tend to fight to the death, but terrible wounds can be inflicted. If they were ordinary, if that can be said of any horses, they do not deserve to face extinction yet again. And the wild horses of Abaco are far from ordinary. In 1999, ArcWild Incorporated was established as a not-for-profit United States corporation to help save the horses. In August of 2002, ArcWild succeeded in having the herd accepted by the Horse of the Americas Registry. The registry accepts only horses of indubitable Spanish descent. The horses have become known as the Abaco Barbary horse, tracing their lineage to the north coast of Africa prior to the advance of the Moors into Spain. Throughout the world, barbs are recognized as a rare and endangered species. In November of 2002, at the urging of the newly formed group Friends of the Abaco Barbary Horse, Prime Minister Perry Christie declared his support for the horses in front of Parliament, and a short time later, they were granted their preserve. At last, there is hope for these magnificent horses who have survived dog attacks, human attacks, fire, and hurricane. They may be facing a real future again. As we continue to raise funds and develop the preserve, we continue to provide medical support for the horses right out in the field. Most of the horses' problems are caused by wrong habitat. The horses spent over 500 years in the forest. When the 3 were rescued and brought to the farm, they still traveled back into the forest. But after Hurricane Floyd, raging fires were fueled by deadwood, trails were blocked by fallen trees. The horses were driven back onto the farm, full-time. Their normal diet was replaced by carbohydrate-laden grasses, originally planted for cattle. There's been no foals since before Floyd. This is nature's way of protecting the mares from pregnancies that would kill them in their present states. The sanctuary proved to be deadly. This will change when the horses move back into their normal habitat in the pine forest. To be with the horses in their free and unfettered state is a richly rewarding experience we plan to share. Visitors will be able to meet the horses in their ancestral forest home. Meet them on their own grounds with no human dominance issues intervening.